to be here. I'm going to introduce our esteemed panel, and it is a great panel, if I do say so myself. Joining me here on stage, we have Joe Welch, Executive Director of U.S. Army Transformation and Training Command, T2COM, and PAE for Command and Control Encounter C2. We have Chris Calio as well, from Chairman and CEO of RTX, Mark Marengo, Managing Director of JP Morgan, and Major General David W. Smith, Deputy to the Chief of Air Force Reserve. It's great to have all of you here. And the topic of this panel is the engine of peace through strength. And so I sort of want to build off of the conversation that was just happening on stage before. But specifically, if I look at the description of this panel, it's all about turning intent into output. And we could easily fill up the next hour just talking about that. So perhaps that's exactly where we start. Maybe with some opening comments, we'll just go down the line. And Joe, I'll start with you from an Army perspective.
Okay, yeah, well, I think you all had the good fortune to listen to our Undersecretary talk about what we're doing with regard to Army transformation. That's a journey I've been privileged to be on. My background, I've got 25 years within the Army and civil service. Most of that has been in acquisition capacity and being involved in the good and the bad and the ugly associated with that. And I can tell you, like, the environment over this past year, from the acquisition transformation strategy that the Secretary had said, down through the services and what it's enabling our workforce to do is just something I haven't seen, in my career. What it's going to open up our ability to do, what we have demonstrated already, taking advantage of this, cutting through bureaucratic red tape and kind of throwing out processes that aren't serving our warfighters. This is a fantastic journey to have been on. So I'm glad to be on the panel with the esteemed gentlemen to my left and look forward to this discussion.
Great. General Smith, I see you nodding your head with some of those comments.
100% agree with Joe. First of all, Morgan, thank you for moderating. For the Govini team, thanks for having us. Great venue to just talk about these important issues from the Defense Department or Department of War perspective with regard to working with industry, working with private capital on how we can get after peace through strength. Clearly, our senior leadership from the executive down to the Department of War has, earlier someone said a mandate, I think it was there, I talked about a mandate that sent a clear signal all the way down to the lowest levels of the department with regards to modernization, getting after providing the warfighter. This really is about the warfighter, right? We can't forget, and I don't know if anybody commented earlier, let's not forget that we're involved in current combat operations, and our hearts and prayers go out to the safety of our service members that are downrange right now across the joint force. But our service secretaries are fully committed to acquisition reform. It's clear that the strategic direction is coming from the top to every level of the department down to the services. And from my service, both the Secretary of the Air Force and the Chief of Staff of the Air Force are fully committed to getting capability to the warfighter, fly, fix, and fight, making sure we have capability that is ready for the warfighter, and how we can enable that with some of these initiatives is truly a historic time as we navigate this process. Thank you.
So hearing about the transformation and the shift in demand signals and acquisition reform as it moves its way through the Department of War, how's that playing out on the industry side, Chris?
Yeah, I really liked what you said up front, which was turning intent into output. I'm pretty sure we're here to talk about the output part. At RTX, as many of you may know, make a number of the key munitions, both that we're seeing today, but that obviously the U.S. and our allies rely on. I'll just echo what was said before. Both Secretary Hegseth, Deputy Secretary Feinberg have been very, very clear about industry getting on board with transformation. And so what does that mean? Number one, it means thinking differently about how we make what we make today. Is there a way to make it faster and get the capabilities in the hands of the warfighter as quickly as we possibly can? And that means really looking at it from the studs down. Like, how do we design? How do we make? How do we design for manufacturability? All the things that will help us get output out faster today. And then a little bit longer term is the fact that they've said, look, we want to take away this complaint from industry about the episodic nature of ordering. We want to give long-term visibility into demand, firm contracts that allows you to invest and invest with confidence in the capacity and capability that you need to continue to build these munitions at higher and higher rates. And they've done just that. We've signed 5 framework agreements with the department over the last few weeks with that in mind. And keep in mind, one of the best things that does, it takes our supply chain and allows them to invest. The majority of our suppliers are medium and small businesses. They need that certainty to invest, and I think the department has zeroed in on that, and they're addressing that.
Okay, I want to dig into that in more detail in just a moment here. But first, Mark, I want to get your thoughts on this, and specifically the role that private capital can play, especially when JP Morgan has really been on the front lines here in terms of thinking about this differently.
Yeah, no, thanks, Morgan. And again, thank you, Tara and Amir, for having us and putting this great event together. But it's exactly that, and that was really the foundation of the SRI, the Security and Resiliency Initiative that we announced last year, which is a $1.5 trillion commitment to finance and invest in critical industries. I think output, as Chris said, is one part of this. The other part of it is resiliency and making sure that we have resilient supply chains here in America that enable us to support the ramp. I think where we're spending a lot of time is as you dissect the supply chains across many of these big programs where the demand signals are there to ramp up 3 to 4x. To Chris's point, many of them are small and mid-sized businesses. Many of them may not have the resources or the capital to be able to invest, to modernize, and to expand capacity in order to meet that demand. So we're trying to align all the resources of JP Morgan, both human capital as well as financial capital, to bring that to bear to help enable all these companies to ramp up. The last thing I would say is just say I've been incredibly encouraged over the last year about the level of public and private partnership. I mean, the level of cooperation that we're seeing from industry, government, and the financial community is at a level that I've not seen it in my career at JP Morgan. And I think if there's more of that, we'll be able to meet all the objectives and the output and be able to ramp up and ultimately deliver the capabilities to our warfighters that we need.
Yeah, along those lines, this idea of public-private partnership and how that is evolving here, it certainly kept us very busy at CNBC in terms of covering some of the details around some of these deals that we've seen. I guess just to give us some examples of how JP Morgan's already participating in some of these deals.
Sure. Well, let me give you one example, which I think really goes to highlight the partnership. So last year, we worked on a deal with MP Materials, and the problem set that we were solving for was very unique and specific, right? We had, if you look at rare earth minerals, 80 to 90% of the rare earth minerals that are used in defense applications are sourced from overseas. And so there was very much a strategic desire to build more of a capability here in America. And so we had worked with MP Materials. Now the problem here was that rare earth magnets were being sold internationally at a price that was below the marginal cost of production in the US. And so there was a disincentive for private capital or industry to invest in that capability to expand production because they couldn't invest those dollars and make a reasonable rate of return. And so in working with the team from MP, the government, and JP Morgan, we put together a creative solution whereby the government was willing to lean in and take a little bit of risk through an offtake agreement and some pricing support, which ultimately enabled us to be a little more aggressive in terms of the capital solution and the debt underwritten commitment that we were able to provide. And now we've actually built that capability here in the United States. So I think it's a terrific example of how where industry, government, and the financial community can work together to tailor bespoke solutions to solve some of these deep-rooted problems.
Yeah. Chris, we had a number of executives at the White House just last Friday meeting with the president and talking about the headline from it was quadrupling production of some of these exquisite systems, missiles, munitions, and the like. Some of this also stems from, you just touched on it before, but these agreements, framework agreements that companies such as yours have inked and signed in the last couple of weeks. So when we do talk about supply chain, we talk about the fragility of the defense industrial base. What is it going to take to double, triple, quadruple production of things like Patriot missiles and THAAD and the like?
Yeah, I think it's a partnership between the primes, the department, and the larger supply chain ecosystem. So just take Patriot as an example. The department rightfully is looking at us and saying, why does it take so long, and why does it cost so much? Okay, all very fair questions. And if you really start to peel that back a little bit, some of it has been because of the episodic buying patterns that we've seen. There are a number of suppliers that if they don't have an order during a particular period of time, that line goes dry, they go invest somewhere else, they get into other lines of business, and then when you want to ramp up again, they're not ready to go. So a big piece of this, and you heard Mark talk about it, is addressing the supply chain fragility. In some cases, that means having more than one source for some of the critical elements and pieces of the bill of materials. In other cases, it means making sure that they get the financing they need, so they're investing in tooling and test equipment, and they're hiring people ahead of need. One of the things that the department has done is they've established this Office of Strategic Capital, and that is something that some of these small and medium-sized businesses can tap into who don't maybe have the balance sheet of some of the primes to be able to make those investments. But I said it up front, Morgan. When I talk about the supply chain, I don't mean to talk about it as something separate from us. Like, our suppliers are us. And I think we need to be better at giving a very clear demand signal. We need to be better at designing for manufacturability. We need to be better at making sure that the production yields are high enough to meet the rates that are being required here. So that's why I mean by it's a partnership. It's the capital, it's the supply chain fragility, and of course a lot of this falls on us, the primes, as well.
Yeah, before those agreements were announced, there was some criticism publicly on social media from President Trump about the sluggishness of production ramp at RTX. I'm not going to get into that with you.
I hadn't seen that.
Yeah. But I do want to get your response to that and how quickly the criticism that has been out there about how quickly a company such as yours can ramp production when we are talking about things like supply chain and demand signals and policy impacts and how they all converge to bring us to this moment of trying to get the U.S. military to a wartime footing.
Well, we can ramp production, and as I said up front, the administration is rightfully asking, how can you do more and how can you do it faster? If you just look at 2025 and our key munitions, we increased output 20% year over year. But there's more that we've got to continue to do. As part of these framework agreements, when you do have the long-term demand signal, a 5 or 7 year firm, demand, that means we're going out and ordering long lead time material, tooling, test equipment today to enable that. We're not waiting around for, are we going to get a contract? Are we not going to get a contract? All of those types of games and moves that people play. The department has given us a very clear North Star, and now we've got to go out and hit it. And we have no problem being accountable. Accountability is not the issue. We're not running from that at all. I think we're completely in sync now with what the department needs and what it wants. And there's been plenty of times in this country's history where we've ramped to some of those levels. And again, some of that means that we have to look at doing things differently within our own four walls, more automation, for instance, using digital in a way that enables more production. Things that perhaps we hadn't done before that we're investing in today.
So we were just talking about it. Getting on a wartime footing, arsenal of freedom. Now we actually do have a war in Iran. So how does that factor into how the Army is moving into this position and strengthening itself and transforming?
For a lot of munitions, and what Chris and Mark are saying about here is about the demand signal that we're able to put forward, right? And rightly so focused on munitions, especially with what's going on right now. Part of what we're looking at also is where that dynamic can apply better to more things we can do. The Army is a very large organization, right? We talk about hundreds of thousands of soldiers, hundreds of thousands of platforms, and we're all that beyond kind of a modern tech baseline. So our Undersecretary talking earlier about the command and control system, this as the digital warfare tools that are, on tablets, in phones, in our vehicle and our platforms to be able to command and control that with all the warfighting capabilities, whether that's intel, sustain, logistics, fires, et cetera. We have similar challenges there as well, and power also we've got, in my view, we've got these demand signal challenges, yes, at the large, exquisite munition level, but we also got it much lower. Typically things we don't look at in terms of multi-year, but we're starting to ask, industry, if you were to have a longer-term commitment promise, which we don't necessarily have the authority to do, but we are asking the question, what would the impact on the pricing be? What was that certainty do in terms of like lowering the cost of capital, which makes it cheaper for us? And if it's cheaper, we can get out to that kind of very large scale army much faster. You kind of retire all of the tech that we've inherited through all of the kind of stovepipe systems we've been operating under for a few decades here. We kind of have a fresh start. We really need to drive those costs down. What these guys are doing to us is we need to be very clear about what our own commitments are going to look like in order for them to deliver that.
So you get industry on board. How about getting lawmakers on board? Are they on board?
Yeah, so they want the same thing, right? They want us to be able to provide for the Army. I think that in terms of multi-year, that's a subject point because it does represent a commitment on our behalf. So in some cases, we've been having discussions about what are the other kinds of commitments, like what is the impact of a letter of intent, something short of an actual legislative through Congress multi-year authorization. What impact would that have? I think the overall theme under the acquisition transformation we're doing now is we're moving away from this environment where we simply say, here are our requirements, and you meet them or not. And we're starting to ask about how hard is it to find solutions to our problems. What are the things that we can do to make this cheaper overall? And looking at the authorities to do that. I mean, I think that those are what we've got in conversations that I've had. Multi-year being one of potentially many tools that we use to lower the cost of acquisition for us.
And General Smith, I could put the same question to you in regards to the Air Force. And I guess I would also just feather in the question of what does this mean for the weapons mix moving forward too? Exquisite versus low-cost commercial, fast-produced, cheaper, et cetera. I mean, we're seeing it play out in real time in Iran right now in terms of what's being used and utilized.
No question. So, one thing I'd offer to follow up from all the panelists' comments is, when we think about capability development for the warfighter and pushing those requirements down to industry and making it more easy for industry to have a more stable environment to invest in and a more stable, I start with the strategy, right? Well, the strategy is clear. We've already touched on that. Our leadership is fully committed to a strategy that gets capability rapidly to the warfighter at speed and scale. So with that strategic environment, then what do you go to next? And that informs force design. And as you know, Joe knows this, all the services are uniquely committed to having a clear force design. The Air Force has clear force design guidance. And then what that does is that informs your capability development strategy and your capability development implementation plan, which gets after requirements. And what we need to do, is make those requirements easier for industry, right? We need to just tell industry what is our problem we're trying to solve. What is our capability gap? Allow industry to innovate on that rather than the older system where we had these very exquisite requirements that we used to use when we were trying to deal with the industry.
Let me just pull on that for a second, Morgan, because it's a great point. And in some cases, we in industry need to come back and say, I know these are the requirements. We can do 90 out of 100 of these, and we'll get you X% of the capability for Y% of the cost. Generally speaking, that's not how we're wired, and we need to change the wiring. Second thing I would say is, and you kind of referenced it, Morgan, this convergence between defense and commercial. For us, we view it as a huge opportunity. Half of our business is commercial aerospace. We have a track record of taking things that were developed for commercial aerospace and bringing them over into defense application. And so we've got to be more aggressive about finding those opportunities as well.
I definitely agree with your first one. I mean, the number of times I've wished the companies would come in and say, you just took out this return, that return, that can do this. But you're right, that typically doesn't happen. We've talked to companies for a variety of reasons. And sometimes companies know that the government's asking for the wrong thing and they anticipate that we will make changes as we go along. So I'm not sure that the incentives are always there in order to point that out. We've actually talked about a way of doing solicitation where we might say, here are the requirements, but we also would like a second like, you give us the requirements back, what we're willing to do with rather able to, and see how we can do that. Just so you know, like, the problem we're trying to solve, that's another way to get around it. And we can see that, like, robotics and autonomy. Like, the Army early on, we were looking at in that field, you know, we started down the traditional reactor requirement path of, this is what the robot needs to look like, this is how large it is, this is how fast it needs to go, this is how long it needs to last on the battery or whatever. We weren't really describing the problem, that robot or set of robots or autonomous set of systems. You know, so we were describing a problem like that, like, you know, be able to conduct a breach operation without putting human lives at risk.
We were basically specifying a solution. So when we take a step back and say, this is what we're trying to do, what we found is that industry is a lot more creative in terms of what they can come back and provide to us, and it probably meets our needs a lot better because we're actually talking about our problems, not a thing that we imagine might solve it, but turns out it actually doesn't, and then we just get disappointed.
Chris, are there examples of how this is playing out at RTX right now?
Say that again, Morgan, sorry?
Just the idea of interacting differently and sort of innovating.
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's kind of something we've got to go push on our team. We've got 180,000 people, 60,000 engineers. They have been wired to do things, brilliant, you know, innovative people, but have been wired to do exactly what you just said. If there are 100 requirements, I'll give you 105. I'll get more than an A+ on the test in terms of satisfying the requirements, when in fact, we've had to go say, no, just think about this a little bit differently. I'll give you an example. We've got a counter UAS application. It's called Coyote. It was used as part of the Army. And very quickly, we said, hey, this could be used for a maritime application. What are the very quick changes that we would need to make in order for it to work in that type of theater? Normally, that might take a couple of years. We ended up, you know, having it fielded within 9 months. And again, so it's these examples that you're just trying to continue to build momentum within your organization. How do you take one application that's done for one service, for one mission, and what tweaks can you make to it, and where could it be applicable somewhere else?
Mark, I want to get your thoughts on this.
Yeah, a couple things. I think, I want to go back to the point around the long-term contracts and the visibility, because I think as we think about allocating capital to facilitate, you know, the reindustrialization of America, to the ramp, you know, incremental munitions production, the capital's available, right? I mean, there's, you know, the government through the DOW, through the DOC, you know, through Exim Bank controls roughly $1.5 trillion of capital. As I mentioned before, our SRI initiative is going to facilitate and help finance and invest another $1.5 trillion over the next 10 years. There's $1.3 trillion of, you know, private equity dry powder. You've got a lot of venture capital money. So I think that the capital is there.
That's a lot of capital, by the way.
It's a lot.
Talking about trillions with T's.
It's a lot. And look, some of that's obviously in the private equity world. It's not all allocated to this sector. But, you know, as we think about the capital, I think it's there. To me, it's all about how do we unlock that capital in a way where the risk return makes sense. And I think part of this comes back to the whole concept of, can we provide industry as well as the financing community the visibility that the orders are there, the cash flows are there, because I think we can finance against that, right? A seven-year missile contract, you know, we can actually securitize those cash flows if we have confidence that those future cash flows are going to be there. And so that's where I think a lot of this comes back to, you know, the framework under which industry and government works, our budgeting process, and the contracting process, because I think there's a lot that we can do creatively, as we did in MP, as we did in Korea Zinc, as we did in a number of these other deals in L3, to unlock a lot more of that capital. And to Joe's point, unlocking it at a much lower cost of capital, which ultimately, you know, benefits the DOW and ultimately benefits the taxpayer.
As somebody who's been covering this industry for a longish time, we'll say more than a decade, I can't stress how much of a paradigm shift what you're saying is versus 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and specifically how Wall Street and, you know, private sector, how capital has interacted with this industry. I mean, it is a paradigm shift what you're saying right now.
Yeah, no, for sure. As I said at the beginning, I've been doing this for 30 years, and I've never seen this level of partnership and cooperation across industry, government, and the financial community. And look, I think what we've demonstrated in the last 6 months, as you look at the number of deals that have gotten done, and more importantly, the problems that have been solved in terms of reshoring production of rare earth minerals, in terms of ramping up production, reindustrializing America, I think it's a testament of what we can accomplish when people do come together around a common set of problems. So it's encouraging.
I would agree with you on the last several years being a sea change in the impact that venture and private capital's had in this area. And I think to what Chris was saying about the workforce and kind of like how they're set in their ways and they need some encouragement. This is very different. So just speaking on like kind of like the Pentagon side, we've got the same thing with our acquisition workforce. They can get the job done, but they've been working in a different set of circumstances. They're not used to asking companies, for example, to describe the risk that they're taking on. Kind of like they're not used to asking companies what their valuations are, if they're profitable or not. The things that are really driving their behavior when they interact with us is something that they're not really used to. But I think what we've learned is that that's the key to Mark's point. Like that's the key to unlocking all of this is having that mutual level of understanding. I mean, all of what you're describing is kind of like it's a common identification, understanding of the risk on both sides, right? And if you can't start with something like that, then I think it just gets very challenging. And the default is to go back into this is our requirement. We'll look for solicitations who can meet it, and then you're at what kind of Chris is talking about, which is, okay, well, even though, industry may know that there's a better way to do it, if the government says this is the only way that you can compete and win, then that's going to drive the behavior. So we absolutely have to be open to working under that different model, and that's got to be different behavior amongst our contracting professionals, acquisition. I mean, it kind of runs the gamut.
The only thing I'll add to Joe's point is this idea of how do we create investability for Mark and for private capital. We used to have this model in the defense industrial base and the innovation of like the three-legged stool, government, industry, academia, and now maybe a fourth leg, which is private capital. So venture capital, private equity, investment banks, family entities. How do we make it investable? How do we reduce their risk from a department standpoint? I mean, clearly we have to work within the confines of our appropriations, but when we're talking munitions, we can prioritize where that is on our budgets. Each service can prioritize that to give the Chris's of the world stability in that longer cycle time, and to lower the risk for private equity.
Sticking with munitions for a moment, because it is a big debate right now, at least in media, is does the Air Force, does the military overall have what it needs right now with what we're seeing in the Middle East, munitions and missile stockpiles?
Yes. I think that there's clearly a demand signal, regardless of our current operations. We're going to have to obviously restore that capability in the low-end munitions as well as the high-end munitions. But clearly, the department is laser focused on not just our current operations, but what a near-peer adversary might require of munitions. So we have to invest in munitions long-term if we're talking about peace through strength and deterrence. And if required, the current operations in our strategic environment demonstrate that if required, we have to be decisive.
Yeah, I would even excited you're asking about munitions, which we can produce ahead of time and kind of keep on hand. But there are other types of things that we may need at a moment's notice, and may change actually very quickly, right? And so the manufacturability improving, and I know Chris mentioned some of this, but I think it goes much wider than that, because you start talking about UAS systems, ground robotic systems, many things where the cycle time is changing very quickly, and of course we don't necessarily have any control over when this equipment will be demanded. As the events of the last, week and a half or a couple of weeks have shown. But the ability to very rapidly produce that at scale is something that we have to look at as well. Because if the only answer, I mean, it may work to some degree for munitions, but for looking at the totality of what we need, if the only answer is that it needs to be produced and stockpiled, and then maybe we'll use it in a year, maybe we'll use it in 5 and 10, there's some technologies where we'd be stockpiling things that are, you know, completely obsolete by the time we'd ever need them. So it goes back to the need to be able to very rapidly produce, make adjustments, and when they're needed, that we actually have that pipeline. And I don't know how we maintain that. Like our current processes aren't supportive of that. We would have to have continuous buying to allow it. But advanced manufacturing techniques and other things maybe can get us to that point where we actually can rapidly scale based on events.
Yeah.
The other thing maybe I would just add to that, it's part of the design philosophy is how do you design with an eye towards the need to upgrade, preferably in the field when you need it, so that things don't go obsolete. There are certain pieces of our industry, take microelectronics, for instance, right? There's far more demand in other industries than in ours, and those evolve very, very quickly. How do we make sure that we stay with the state of the art and don't get sort of left behind? And I think the department has been a significant partner in that. They've looked at where's their demand in other industries for things and make sure that we can ensure that you've got enough capacity for the defense industrial base to do the kinds of things that I'm talking about.
Are there certain areas or certain industries where you could see crossover where you don't have enough of it now and you want more?
Well, look, I'll go back to what Mark said before. I think the very innovative and creative deals on critical minerals, for instance, has been something that's been very welcome. I think, again, this administration has come in and zeroed in on some very, very strategic, potentially constrained areas and has come up with some creative ideas. I'll just tell you that the folks that, whether it be on the framework agreement or these other types of deals that we interact with, it's much more of a strategic business conversation as opposed to you shall build and deliver. There's a lot of that too, but there's a broader conversation around where are the shortfalls, where are your suppliers located, where could there be a potential issue 2-3 years from now, and how do we get ahead of that?
Interesting. One of the things I'm starting to pick up intel on is memory chips. And obviously, we've seen those prices absolutely surge. It's getting a lot of attention with PCs and on the AI infrastructure build out side, but I'm starting to hear increasingly about it on the defense side as well.
That's exactly where I was going when I said, there are other industries where there's higher demand, and we've got to make sure that our place in line is preserved. And that as those evolve and people say, I don't want to make the prior generation stuff, I want to make the new stuff, that we still have access to what we need to do what we need to do to fulfill our commitments. And I think that's something the department has been very focused on. We've been very focused on. It's been a partnership.
Mark, I see you nodding your head over there.
No, look, it's one of the areas that, one of the critical areas, frankly, that we're focused on around our SRI initiative, right? The whole semiconductor chip ecosystem is where we're spending a lot of time, and I can tell you that it's an area that we would 100% get behind and extend our capital to help make sure that critical suppliers like Chris have access to the chips that they need and the current generation of chips, and that it's not marginalized given the demand that's coming from the whole AI dynamic. So we're spending a lot of time there, and I would fully anticipate that there will be a number of other deals in that space as you look down the road.
As we talk about supply chain, we're also increasingly talking about software and AI supply chain. Joe, I'm going to start this one with you, because obviously getting a lot of attention right now, given all the back and forth we've seen with Anthropic and LLMs being used in classified settings. How do you navigate that at the Army in real time and think about that risk?
Yeah, so we have to manage it appropriately, but there's no doubt that we need to be able to implement that kind of technology in our capabilities, right? What we're looking to provide our soldiers, and the Pentagon's looking to provide all our warfighters, is that ability to, sense, decide, act on a much faster cycle. Our adversaries have access to advanced capabilities, and so there's really no question that we have to be able to use them. I think the best way to understand how to is to get started, right? And so that's behind the AI initiative within the Pentagon. And this kind of spans the gamut, right? You can look at some of the Undersecretary up here earlier talking about all of our business systems and all of the sort of like data entry and other manual processes associated with that. But we're no different than any other business in this country looking at how automation can ensure that we are able to go through things faster. But then when you take it from a commander perspective and you look at the overwhelming amount of information that comes in now through the ubiquity of sensors and other architectures, the ability to rapidly move through all of that, we absolutely need tools like AI-enabled, automated, to be able to ensure that they can make the best decisions that they can. And if you look today at, for example, like anything like a fires chain or any other thing that has to go from here to there, and all of the voice calls, the radio calls, confirmations of information, message translations, sticky note being passed, and all of the rest of that, it's minutes, it's hours potentially in terms of like getting clearance to get through all of that. And that's not what's going to, win the next, win the next war. So there's no doubt that we have to use it. We have to use it responsibly. I think that comes along with beginning now and iterating through and ensuring that our ethics and our values are certainly laid on top of that underlying technology.
Morgan, just to add on the supply chain piece in manufacturing, we also have to encourage, not just with the primes, but we touched on this earlier with the tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, this ecosystem of supply chain and manufacturing. Not everybody's going to build an exquisite weapon, but we need wiring harnesses, we need sensors, we need propulsion. How do we encourage that lower level investment and that manufacturing base and capability, 3D printing, AI, data. I mean, we need to get down to encourage the investment in both the primes and the lower tiers.
All right, we got 13 minutes left, and there's a few other topics I want to get into. Mark, I'm going to start with you, in part because your boss, Jamie Dimon's been very vocal about this topic, and that is regulatory reform, permitting, the like. We can unlock the capital, we can unlock the demand signal, but then you also have to get the permits to build the factory. Yeah. So how do you navigate that?
Well, it's the permits and also, by the way, the workforce.
Yes, that's my other topic.
Which we haven't touched on yet,
yes.
Which I would argue is equally important. But yeah, look, and I'm sure Chris can give you countless examples of, where if you're trying to build a new facility, facilitize, there's a lot of regulatory red tape that you have to go through. And so, again, coming back to this public-private partnership concept, I think there's a lot that we can be doing to reduce the regulatory burden on industry that would enable them to ramp up, scale, produce, innovate a lot more quickly than we do today. And I think one of the things that we're doing as part of our security and resiliency initiative broadly is we're convening around a number of these issues. This is a big one, right? We have a center for geopolitics that we stood up within our organization that writes papers and research on exactly these types of topics. And I will tell you that when you look at the benefits in terms of speed, agility, development, industrialization that can come just simply from reducing the regulatory burden, it's massive. And so I think there's a huge tailwind to be unlocked here in the economy if we were to just sort through all of it.
I guess to Mark's point, I'll pick up on a phrase used earlier, which is war footing. And I know it's an overused phrase, but that is what the department has said to us, and you need to see it at every level. You need to see it in the regulatory and permitting, right? We've got to go expand some of our facilities. We've got to go order new equipment and whatnot, so we need that permitting to go quickly. We need to get employees that we hired who work in classified environments cleared faster, for instance. Like, everybody's got to be on that war footing. And of course we do. And I don't care where you work in our company. If you're in HR hiring people, there's got to be a level of urgency in cutting through bureaucracy to get people in the door. You just have to see it at every piece of this chain. Regulatory, clearly one, but it's going to take all of that to get to the levels of production that we're talking about. Certainly we feel accountable for the lion's share of that. We've got to produce that, but there are whole other sort of complementary capabilities and things that need to be done, and everybody needs to have that same war-footing mentality.
Let's talk about the workforce, because that was my next topic. And Chris, I'll start that with you. Do you have the workers you need to be able to ramp this production?
We have the workers we need for what we're producing today, and we continue to hire, and we also continue to introduce things to make our workforce more productive, whether that be automation, whether that be more AI and digital capabilities. How do you make sure that the quality and speed of decision making in our facilities is as high as it can be? How do we make sure that that machine that's running 24/7, there's going to be a problem with it, you're getting some sort of predictive analytics, and you can get out ahead of that so that the line stays, hot. So again, that's not necessarily hiring more people, that's just doing better with what you have. But as we think about going to these 2 to 4x, yes, we're going to have to continue to hire people. There's a huge potential, surge of high-paying manufacturing jobs in this country that'll, have to come from that. And we're out there today hiring in advance. And thus far, we've been pretty successful. But a lot of these folks, again, work in classified environments, even those who are doing some of the manufacturing. So we've got to get them in the door and get them cleared before they can be as productive as they need to be. So we need some help there.
General Smith, I got to get your thoughts on this, because you're in a unique position here.
Well, I'll touch on that. I mean, one of the reasons I'm here is a little bit of a requirements background, but a programming background, but I'm also a reservist. And when you talk about the workforce and you talk about security clearance requirements, remember, about 70% of our workforce is part-time. We have avionics troops, maintenance troops, sheet metal troops. You name the capability, we have folks that are working in that realm that could offer workforce to our private companies. So there's a great resource there in your reserve components, and it's not just the Air Force, it's across the Joint Force, where we can help with this skilled labor to help this effort and the classification requirements as well.
Any thoughts from the Army side?
Well, obviously managing our workforce is a little different than, what RTX or other companies have to do to manage theirs. I mean, but to answer your question, I'm confident we have the people that we need, whether we have them in the positions to affect the change that they need to. That I think that's at least the way that I'm looking at, my own workforce. That's how I'm looking at it right now. I mean, administration's been very clear about the reduction in barriers to achieve acquisition transformation, being able to go faster. And I know that we have these folks within our workforce. When you look at an org chart, they may not necessarily be at the top of them for different areas, but they get it. And I think that's part of my job and others like me is to identify these folks and empower them, because they understand how to navigate this. So it's a little bit of a workforce shaping talent management. But I've met enough folks who know and get this that I'm confident that we have the people. We just got to get them in the right positions. And that's largely what we started through our acquisition transformation that took place back in November within the Army, and we're continuing to execute.
On the private sector side, Mark, I want to get back to your thoughts on this. There's a lot, and I see this somebody's covering it day in, day out on television, but there's a lot of focus, hand-wringing even, about displacement of white-collar workers in the workforce as AI takes root across corporate America. The flip side of that is the manufacturing side of that, and that is the idea that AI is going to enable and upskill workers more quickly. In the meantime, one of the conversations I find myself having with CEOs both on and off camera is the displacement. Yes, there's enough workers, but are they skilled the way they need to be for where the future is headed? And so I guess just the role of private sector in that.
Yeah. So I think a couple things, and I'll tie it back to the defense conversation that we're having here, because I do think there is a shortage of labor, and I think the other aspect of this is do we have a workforce with the skills that are actually aligned to the next generation of where we're taking the defense complex. Right? And I would argue that as you project forward and you go around, you talk to a lot of manufacturers, and they would tell you that there's shortage of certain skills, right? Engineers, right? Software engineers, welders. And so these are some of the key skills that I think we really need to be focused on, and making sure that we're training the next generation workforce to have the skills where we need them, and really start to look at our workforce as strategic infrastructure, as you will. And so to your question, I think there's a lot that the private sector can be doing to align with that end goal. For example, right, retraining, right? I think there's a lot that industry can be doing to retrain their employees to make sure that they're getting the skills that align with those capabilities and where we need them down the road. I think apprenticeships. I think that's something that industry can be doing in partnership with state and local governments, with the federal government, and I really believe that through these types of programs and apprenticeships, you can develop the workforce of the future that again aligns with those types of capabilities. So there's a lot we can do. As I mentioned earlier, we stood up an office for geopolitics within JP Morgan about a year ago, and we actually just recently wrote on this very issue in December, and it lays out a lot of these types of ideas in terms of where again industry can partner with the government in terms of making sure that we've got the skilled labor of the future.
Maybe just to emphasize, I agree with everything you just said, Mark. And for us, what's been successful is working with trade schools and community colleges on shaping the curriculum, bringing them into our facility, saying, here's what we need, here's what we do. I think there's a lot of people that would come into our facilities, our manufacturing facilities, and be blown away in terms of the level of complexity and automation that's there today. And so I think it's opening up people's eyes, but making sure that we are shaping the curriculum at those feeder institutions. And we will go look at where we've got critical mass, find the community college, the trade schools, make sure the curriculum reflects what we need today, what we see over the next 5 years. And we've been pretty successful doing that.
We've got 3 minutes left, so not even. So I think just final comments, and we'll just go down the line. And Joe, I'll start with you before we wrap up this discussion.
Okay, I'll probably have nightmares later about what Chris said about the requirements. There's a better way to do it, and we don't understand about it. So I guess my final comment, I'll just put in the pitch. I'm one of 6 portfolio acquisition executives within the Army under the Secretary of Acquisition Transformation Strategy, and we were very deliberate about how we built that. So these are 6 folks that within the Army cover all of the things that we would buy for monetization, as well as, to your point, General, the force design, force development of the employment of that capability. So I would encourage anybody who thinks that we're doing something silly, you see a solicitation RFI, you think we could be doing better, reach out to one of us. Increasingly, it'll be reach out to our workforce, as I mentioned earlier, but that's what we stood up to do, is try to understand, very early on, if it looks like we're heading the wrong direction, thinking about a problem wrong, not understanding risk as well as we should be, because that's the time to get things, kind of settled and move forward on a positive trajectory. If we start learning these things through experience, which is typically the case in a year or 3 years or 5 years, it's obviously way too late to be benefiting our soldiers and our warfighters. So that would be my comment. Thanks, Morgan.
Okay.
Thanks, Morgan. I'm not an acquisition specialist. I don't have much of an acquisition background. I'm a warfighter, but I did do my homework. And I'm told that if we want to create Freedom's Forge 2.0, it's going to take all of us up here on this stage working together. So defense, industry, and private equity, that's how we get a revitalized defense industrial base, and that's how we get after our strategic priorities.
All right, Chris?
By the way, for those who haven't read that book, I highly recommend it. It is as applicable today as it was then. I'll keep mine really simple, and it's the message that we've received from the highest levels, which is more and faster. And that's where our focus is, that's where our investments are, and I can tell you that's where our workforce is dedicated to.
Okay.
And I'll just end with where the general was, which is in what I've seen in the last 12 months, I've never been more encouraged with the level of partnership across industry, government, in the financial community. And I think the good news is it seems like we all have alignment across all the constituencies in terms of what the issues are, and I don't think there's any problem we can't solve if we all work together to make it happen.
All right. Mark Marengo, Chris Calio, Major General Dave Smith, and Joe Welch, thank you for joining me on stage.
Thank you.
It's great to have you. Thank you.